this presentation, I'm going to talk you through the Problem Behavior Pathway Worksheet, which we also call the Competing Behaviors Pathway Worksheet. And the purpose of this is to actually analyze the problem or the challenging behavior and determine what we think the function of the behavior is, and then come up with an intervention that we can use to teach a replacement behavior, which we mean to be like a socially acceptable alternative behavior that allows the student to access that same function. So when considering what is causing the behavior, we want to look at varying things. Remember the ABCs that we talked about. A stands for antecedents, behavior stands for, or B stands for behavior, and C stands for consequence. We also want to look at setting events, and we typically refer to these as slow triggers. So these can impact the likelihood that a behavior will occur, and setting events can be anything from the actual physical setting of a classroom or the location of an activity, the other peers or teachers in that setting, the noise level of the setting, light, the time of day, all of the different components that make up that setting. Then we look at what happens immediately before the behavior occurs, and we call those the fast triggers. So when you complete your ABC data, you're going to look at what happened right before the behavior happened. What was said to the student? What other peers were in the area? Did any exchanges happen right before that problem behavior occurred? And we write that down objectively. And that will help us best analyze how we can manipulate the antecedents in order to hopefully prevent the problem behavior from occurring. Then we need to write an operational definition of the problem behavior. That means, what does it actually look and sound like? So if an outside observer were to come into the classroom, you have to write a definition that they could use to keep track of the behavior and how often it occurs. Then we're going to note, what do we think is maintaining this behavior? What is causing this behavior to continue? Is it attention? Is it attention from an adult, from a peer? Is it that the student wants access to an item or a tangible or an activity? Is it automatic reinforcement? That means, does it provide some sort of sensory stimulation? Or is it an effort to escape something? Does the student want to escape attention, or do they want to escape activities? It's best for us to use the other data collection sheets that we've already completed to fill out this type of Competing Behavior Pathways worksheet. This is going to be your summary of the behavior before you write your functional behavior analysis or assessment. So let's move on here. So here is a brief version of this form that I filled out for you, and I'm going to scaffold us through talking about this form until we get to the full version. So when we consider the setting events, the basic setting events are Mrs. Gomez's classroom. And we'll talk more about the other setting events that occur there later, but if we think of when the behavior typically occurred based on the case study, it normally occurs within the first hour and a half of the day, and that takes place in Miss Gomez's room. And it also occurs during the end of the day, which is also in Miss Gomez's room. The behavior occurs periodically in the middle of the day, but it's not on a consistent basis. So those are the slow triggers. Now, what are some of the fast triggers? So these are the antecedents, and these are the things that happen right before the behavior occurs. So our ABC data sheet shows us that when Miss Gomez would prompt Caesar to begin working on an assignment related to English, language arts, or reading or journaling, he would typically demonstrate the problem behavior. It also occurred when Miss Gomez greeted Caesar as he came back to the ELA class. So if you remember from the case study, she sent him to the office 2 times within the first hour and a half of a school day. And then when he came back from the office, she greeted him back to class, and he then used some derogatory language when he entered the classroom. So the problem behavior is that Caesar demonstrates verbal outbursts, and we operationally defined verbal outbursts here for us. And remember that it's important to show or to state what does the behavior actually look and sound like. So in this case, verbal outbursts mean cursing or using derogatory statements towards a teacher and or students, using an elevated voice, that means above a normal talking tone, and or murmuring under his breath. So there are a wide range of behaviors here, and if an outside observer was to come in, I think that they would be able to track data based on this definition. And now we write, what do we think is causing this behavior to continue? So what is maintaining the behavior? Well, by using the verbal outbursts, Caesar is able to escape the English language arts work, and he's also able to temporarily escape Miss Gomez's classroom setting when he's sent to the office. So now let's move on, and we're going to digest this a bit more. On this page, we're going to start talking about possible interventions that we can use to address the slow triggers and then the fast triggers, as well as teaching the replacement behavior. And then we're going to talk about how can we encourage use of the desired behavior and discourage use of the challenging behavior. So here in the slow triggers, we broke it down a bit more. And we said that the slow triggers they occur during the morning circle time, and that typically includes journaling activities and reading activities. They then occur during the English language arts block, which follows the morning circle time. And then in the end of the day, it's during the drop everything and read time. That's when most of the problem behaviors occur in that setting. We also would want to write in here probably that this is all in Miss Gomez's room. Now, the fast triggers. So what happens right before that problem behavior occurs? Well, it's typically preceded by verbal prompts by Miss Gomez, and she'll say things like start journaling or start reading. Sometimes, as we mentioned earlier, it's preceded by her greeting Caesar to her classroom. Then the problem behavior is the verbal outbursts that we defined earlier. Now we have to write in this last box over here, we have to note what's maintaining this behavior. Well, remember when we were talking about the case study in the earlier video that we discussed that there can be more than one maintaining consequence sometimes. In this case, it's probably escape, because when Caesar demonstrates the verbal outbursts, he's able to escape both the work and sometimes the classroom setting. But it could also be attention, because sometimes he gets his peers to laugh when he makes the verbal outbursts, and he also gets some unwanted attention, but it's still attention from Ms. Gomez when she has to talk to him. I think the primary maintaining function here is escape, though, and it's escape from teacher demands and the English language arts work. So now that we have broken this down again, we need to consider, okay, what can we do to help Caesar be successful in this environment? Clearly, what we're trying to do already is not working. Right now, Ms. Gomez is prompting, and she's ignoring, and she's sending him to the office. But we can see by looking at the data from the scatter plot, from the data sheets that we shared earlier, that this problem is not decreasing whatsoever. The rate of occurrence continues to be steady. So this is a problem that we will want to address. So what we can do first is here in this box, let's address the slow triggers. So by addressing slow triggers, we can actually try to prevent the problem from occurring in the first place. One way to do this is to pair yourself with a student. So what pairing means is you want to make the student have the desire to come to your classroom and to feel like it's fun and it's a good part of their day. A lot of times as teachers, we get this notion that school doesn't need to be fun for students and students should learn how to just suck up and bear it. But that's not going to be effective when working with a student with emotional impairments or other disabilities such as autism. We really want to make sure that learning is an enjoyable part of a student's day, and to make it enjoyable, we need to pair ourselves with the students, or we need to have the students learn that we can be enjoyable and that the setting of our classroom is enjoyable for them as well. So in order to pair yourself with a student, you're going to want to reduce academic demands for a period of time. This doesn't mean permanently, but for a good enough period of time so that you feel that you can foster a strong rapport with a student. During this time, you're going to want to spend time with a student and talk with a student. You'll probably want to use activities based on the information from the preference assessment and maybe do some of those activities with a student. So in this case, we know that Caesar really enjoys video games and he really enjoys sports. Ms. Gomez may want to watch some YouTube clips about some of Caesar's favorite sports with him and then talk about those clips and get to know him a bit more. She may want to ask him to tell her about some of his favorite activities. Ms. Gomez may want to bring in like a Game Former magazine about video games and read it with him, or just talk to him about what he did over the weekend and what movies or sports or video games he played or went to. It's very important to build a strong rapport with students and foster this positive relationship between the student and the teacher and the student and other students, and just foster a positive classroom climate in general in order to make learning possible. We need to make sure that Caesar believes that Miss Gomez has his best interests in mind and that she wants to help him learn and enjoy school. This may be difficult at first because Caesar is used to Miss Gomez sending him out of her room, and that typically sends the message that she doesn't want to deal with him. So we need to repair that relationship and we need to build that relationship. It's really important to note this, that school should not be the worst part of a student's day. It should be one of the most enjoyable times of the day for the student. This means that we have to modify curriculum and we need to modify the way that we provide instruction. We may want to use interventions such as choice-based interventions. It takes a bit more work on the front end to set this up, but in the long end, it can help students so significantly, and it reduces our frustration as teachers because we will hopefully reduce the challenging behaviors from occurring in the first place. So while some of this is going to be individualized specifically to Caesar, a lot of the strategies that we just spoke of are best practice in general and should be employed with all students in the classroom. The next area that we're going to look at are the triggering antecedent interventions. And these are the interventions that we're going to put in place in order to manipulate the antecedents, or those things that happen right before the challenging behavior typically occurs. So we're going to address the verbal prompts that Ms. Gomez gives Caesar, and we're going to address the type of work that he does. So in order to do this, we may want to incorporate some of Caesar's preferences into assignments, such as content related to video games and sports. So for example, if Caesar has to journal during the circle time, we may want to give him a choice. We may want to say, okay, Caesar, you can journal about this or this activity. Or we may want to say, Caesar, why don't you take a moment to watch this YouTube clip and then write a journal about how you did something similar. Or we may want to allow him to have choice as to where he completes the assignment. We may want to say, Caesar, you can choose to do this assignment in your desk, or you can do it over in the beanbag. We'll also want to provide some scaffolded support during the assignment, especially when he begins to complete this work. So we'll want to probably pair ourselves with him and help him complete the assignment. We might want to allow him to dictate his journals to us and we'll type the assignment. Ms. Gomez could use an aide to be his dictator, or to take the dictation from him and to type or write down the journal in his notebook. We want to play upon his strengths and remember that his oral expression is a strength that he has. So we'll want to tap into that as much as possible. Also, there's a really critical understanding that we need to have. We need to understand what the response rate is. And response rate basically means the amount of effort that Caesar has to put forth in order to yield the consequence. So we need to make the effort of the assignment low to equal a reward in the beginning in order to help him complete more and more assignments and to increase the likelihood that he'll demonstrate the desirable behavior. So by doing all of these strategies, we're trying to still prevent the problem behavior from occurring and increase the likelihood that he'll complete an assignment. The use of choice-based interventions is evidence-based through research, and it's important to note that this is something we need to be doing in the classroom. This, again, is not something that should be done just for Caesar. This is best practice. If you want to engage all students in the class, you may want to provide choice for all students. Now, this can take a lot of time, and it doesn't mean that you have to differentiate for every individual student in your classroom, particularly if you have a large group. But what you can do is you can come up with 2 or 3 options of choices that are pretty generic, yet still allow students to have the autonomy to choose and to be excited about their learning based on their choice. Now we get into the replacement behavior. And what this means is, how are we going to teach Caesar how to respond? So if he gets frustrated and if he doesn't like the work presented to him, and even if we give him 3 different choices, if he gets frustrated, what is he supposed to do? We don't want him to have another verbal outburst. We don't want him to curse. We don't want him to murmur swear words under his breath. But he does need to learn how to express himself in an appropriate way to get a break if that is what he really needs. So what we could do is we could role play. We could teach him how to request a break through vocalization in an appropriate manner. So for example, he could say something like, Miss Gomez, I feel frustrated and I would like to get a drink. Or he could say, Miss Gomez, I would really like to put my head down for a minute. And Miss Gomez could allow him to put his head down for a minute and then go back over to him and say, okay, let's get going. We can do this together, and really motivate him. He could say, Miss Gomez, can I go take a walk for a moment with the aide? Something like that. That's appropriate. That's a big step forward from having a verbal outburst. Now, over time, we'll want to fade those breaks because we can't have Caesar taking breaks frequently throughout class, because that means that he won't be getting all of the learning he needs to get done. But it's important to note that in the past, he wasn't learning much in class because he was having so many verbal outbursts, and in a 1.5 hour period, he was sent to an office twice. So now, if he's going to take some breaks during a class period, that's acceptable, particularly if he's learning how to vocalize that in an appropriate way. Also, it's important to give him another option to respond. Some students become frustrated and it's hard for them to verbalize things. So we may want to give Caesar a response card. It could be something that's on his desk that he points to, or it could be a little response card on a paddle that he holds up in the air to indicate to Ms. Gomez that he needs a break. It's just a way in which he can indicate he needs a break without actually vocalizing this. So this may be a place to start with Caesar, particularly if when he gets really frustrated, he has a difficult time coming up with an appropriate phrase. Then, once he demonstrates the appropriate behavior, whether it's completing the work, which is the desired behavior, or if he's able to vocalize that he's frustrated and needs a break, we really need to reinforce this behavior very heavily. So we want to use verbal praise and frequent feedback, and we also want to give him points for a token economy system. Now we know that in the past he's used a point system and that worked really well for him. So I think picking up on that strategy, we should continue to use that in Ms. Gomez's room because that has been effective in the past and he's familiar with that. We also want to make sure that we discourage any problem behaviors that do come up. So by implementing these different interventions, our hope is that we reduce the challenging behaviors drastically. But it's realistic to assume that Caesar still will have some verbal outbursts. He probably still will have some off days, and he probably still will have some times where he struggles to formalize or to verbalize in an appropriate way that he's frustrated. So when he does have a verbal outburst, it's important for us not to allow him to escape an activity, but instead to kindly come alongside him and provide prompting and redirection. We may have to give him a bit of space first so that we don't escalate a situation, but then you'll want to go alongside and maybe get down at his level, crouch down next to his desk, and talk with him and prompt him to get back on task, or prompt him to use his response card or to ask for a break in an appropriate way. Then, immediately after he demonstrates an acceptable behavior, we need to reinforce that as well. You might also need to make sure that you're providing guided assistance for him to complete a task. So sometimes it's easy for us to fade away our assistance too quickly. So let's say we implement these interventions and Caesar does remarkably well during the first week. So then starting on the second week, we still use some of the setting event interventions and the triggering antecedent preventions, and we still have the response card for him, and we ask him to vocalize when he needs a break, but we don't provide as much scaffolded, individualized support. Sometimes that puts Caesar at risk of demonstrating the challenging behavior again. So we need to make sure to check with him frequently to see how he's doing, provide frequent verbal praise, and then make sure to prompt and provide the extra assistance that he needs. This means that we have to be on a heightened awareness of what's going on in the classroom and what his needs are. Now, once we've filled out this type of sheet, we're able to move in and fill out what we expect him to do through the desired behavior, what the problem behavior is, and then what the acceptable behavior is. I'm going to be honest, you're not going to fill out this worksheet and all pages of this worksheet every time. You're typically going to fill out just a sheet like this. However, it's important for us in this learning phase to fill out all of these different items because this helps us get through the thought process of what is triggering the behavior and what are the maintaining consequences. Once you become more familiar with this process, you are able to fill out the final sheet and use your data collection notes and reference those. But it's important in the beginning to do the whole process. So here we've literally just copied and pasted what we noted earlier. We have the setting events in this box again, where we look at the accommodations. So we want to have Ms. Gomez pair herself with Caesar and spend time talking with him about preferred topics and preferred activities. And this is going to help with the setting events, which the typical setting events for the challenging behavior are that it's during morning circle time, during the English language arts block, or during the DEAR, the drop everything and read time. So by pairing Miss Gomez with Caesar, our hope is that these times of the day and Miss Gomez's classroom start to have like the effect of it being a desirable place to be and give him the allure that there's going to be fun happening in that classroom and during that time. Then the triggering antecedent accommodations, just to recap, we're going to give Caesar assignments that relate to his preference activities, and we're going to use choice-based interventions and offer multiple choices of assignments that it still address the content standards. Our desired behavior is that Caesar will complete the chosen assignment in class. So once he chooses what he wants to do, our end goal is that he does that. Once he does that goal, it's important to still give him a reward and access to escape. So the maintaining consequence, or the reason why he was actually demonstrating the challenging behavior, was because he wanted to escape the tasks. So instead, what we can say is, wow, Caesar, you did a wonderful job completing that assignment. Why don't you choose a reward? One reward may be that he can do a preferred activity for 5 minutes before moving on to the next assignment. What we want to be careful with this is not to use negative reinforcement here, but to use positive reinforcement. So you could pair this with a token economy system. Let's say Caesar's able to earn a ticket, and then he can turn that ticket in for a desired activity for 5 minutes. What we don't want to say is, oh, Caesar, you just have to do this journal prompt. And after you're done with this journal prompt, you can put it away and you can go do this fun activity. The reason why we don't want to say statements like that is that we give the notion that the activity we were asking him to do isn't good. We want Caesar to enjoy what he does. That's why we're giving him the choice-based interventions, or that's why we're using the choice-based interventions. We want school to be fun for him. So we would be shooting ourselves in the foot if we say, oh, just finish this. We know this task isn't great, but in a minute you can go and do this activity. We don't want to kind of decrease the effectiveness of the choice-based intervention. Now, we'll have the setting events with morning circle time, English language arts block, and DEAR time. These normally precede the challenging behavior, right? That's where most of the challenging behaviors occur. And then the triggering antecedents, we know, typically were when Miss Gomez would place a demand upon Caesar. So she would tell him to complete an assignment. But now we're allowing Caesar to choose based on the choice-based intervention. So we're hoping to prevent some of those verbal outbursts just by giving Caesar a choice of what he wants to do. The problem behavior is the verbal outburst. So this is when he curses or uses derogatory phrases or makes derogatory statements under his breath towards a teacher or a student. We want to decrease that. But this problem behavior still allows Caesar to access escape, right? He wants to escape the demands. So instead, what happens if Caesar gets really, really frustrated? And even though he was able to choose what behavior he wanted to, or what assignment he wanted to complete, he still gets very frustrated. We want him to be able to articulate this in a socially acceptable manner. So if Caesar's able to articulate his frustration to Miss Gomez and request a break, we can still give him a break, even if he doesn't complete the work. And that's because we're teaching him that it's okay to request a break. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we want to fade this over time in order to increase the likelihood that he's going to demonstrate the desired behavior. but still we're going to accept that he can request a break in a socially acceptable way for a period of time. And that period of time is going to vary for every student. You're going to take data throughout this process of implementing the interventions, and you're going to look at the data and make decisions based on the frequency and occurrence of the challenging behavior in comparison with the desired behavior and the acceptable behavior, and then determine when you're going to gradually fade out some of the supports. Now here's a support plan. So this helps us start to think about, all right, how are we going to put this into words for other staff members to use in a behavior support plan or in a behavior intervention plan? This helps us think through all of the different options. Once you become more comfortable with the Competing Pathways worksheet, sometimes you'll start with this sheet and you won't fill out the rest of the sheets because you'll have a lot of that other information from your other data collection sheets. However, for a period of time, you may still want to fill out some of the other fields in the other sheets because it's helpful to help us think through the entire process. And we really want to make sure that we're identifying the correct function of behavior, because if you pick an intervention that doesn't target the correct function, the intervention is not likely to be successful. So in the top of this sheet, we've basically recapped what we have already spoken about and what we've already done. Okay, we have the setting events, the antecedents or the predictors, we have our desired behavior, our problem behavior, and then our replacement behavior, which we also call the acceptable behavior. And then we have the consequence. Okay, so for the desired behavior, the consequence will still allow Caesar to escape, but he will be able to choose a preferred activity for 5 minutes as he gets positive reinforcement through the token economy system following completion of an assignment. So if he completes an assignment, he can get a ticket, and then he can turn that ticket in for a preferred activity. So that sounds pretty great. I think he'll enjoy that, or at least that's our hope. Now, let's say Caesar has a verbal outburst. Well, the maintaining consequence is that he's going to be able to escape the work or demands. We want to prevent that from happening. So if he has a verbal outburst, we want to try to do everything in our power to provide the support and the extra prompting to help him complete the assignment or to use a socially acceptable way of requesting a break. Because we don't want to have the verbal outburst equal escape from work or escape from the classroom. Instead, we want him to learn to express his frustration and request a break, and then that would then allow him to escape the work or the demands. So at the bottom of this page, there's check boxes or checklists in these tables. And these are great things to consider. So first, it says, what are the ways to change the context to make the problem behavior unnecessary? And you can look through this list here, and there are several that I selected that would be appropriate for Caesar. So we may want to clarify the rules of expected behavior for an entire class. That doesn't single Caesar out, and that's a good thing to do for all students in general. We may also want to change the schedule. It may be important to look at when English language arts occurs and when the journaling occurs during the circle time. Can we change that at all? Because that starts his day. So Caesar gets to school, and for the first hour and a half of school, he's doing activities related to his deficit area, which is reading. Is there a way in which we can shuffle activities around in the day to have him start out on a more upbeat note? Also, we want to be really careful to remember to pair Caesar with Miss Gomez and with her classroom. So we want to do all of those things. Then, what are ways to prevent the problem behavior? Well, we can provide reminders to Caesar about the things that we expect to see instead of the problem behavior. So if we see that he's starting to get frustrated, but he has not yet expressed this to us, or he has not yet used a response card, we might go over to him and say, "Hey, Caesar, it looks like you're getting a little bit frustrated. Do you need help?" Or you may say, "Hey, Caesar, do you need to request a break? Do you need to go and get a drink for a moment?" If we can do that to try to be proactive and prevent a problem behavior from occurring, that's going to be in his best interest and our best interest. We'll also want to provide extra assistance. So this is the scaffolded instruction. If you see that a student like Caesar is frustrated, go over and help them. Talk them through the assignment. Try to alleviate their frustration and help them see that they're learning. We'll also want to modify the assignments to match his skill area. So we know that Caesar reads significantly below grade level, so we'll want to find text at his instructional level. We're going to want to use the information from the preference assessment to help find activities and create activities and worksheets and reading material that is of interest to him and at his level. Then we need to look at this field. So what can be done to increase the expected behaviors or teach a replacement behavior? Well, we can practice this in class. You can remind him in class. You can practice with a whole group of students so that it doesn't appear that you're just singling him out. But you might also want to role play with Caesar and Ms. Gomez separately. So you may want to have them have like a lunch buddy date during a lunch or after school where they can talk through how he's going to do this. You'll want to have Caesar practice requesting a break. So you can pretend that you've given him an activity and pretend that he's frustrated and have him practice to say he needs a break in a variety of ways or to use the response card and make it fun and enjoyable. A lot of times this can be kind of a fun, goofy lesson with the student, and this can function as a pairing time with the student as well as a teaching time. Then what do we need to do if he still has verbal outbursts? Well, as we said before, we don't want to allow him to escape the assignment or the classroom, but we'll want to prompt and redirect him. We'll want to prompt him to either express his frustration and request a break, or we'll want to prompt him in completing the assignment. You're going to have to read the situation and make an adjustment if need be, but it's really important for us not to allow him to escape. Also, Ms. Gomez will want to work with Caesar to provide the scaffolded support, and she will, as we said, not allow escape. So I put that down here in this other column. Then what do we do when he demonstrates the desired behaviors? So whether he demonstrates the replacement behavior, that's expressing his frustration for a break, or if he completes the assignment in class, what do? We need to use a heavy reinforcement schedule. So we want to give him rewards through the token economy system. We know that this system worked in the past, so we want to continue use of this system. You're also going to want to provide verbal praise to him. Additionally, you're going to want to make sure that he is able to participate in a desired activity for 5 minutes. Now, sometimes people ask, well, what happens if Caesar's able to go and watch a YouTube clip or to do something fun while other students are working? It's important for us to make it clear to students that we are here to help all students learn, and every student learns in a different way, and you're helping Caesar learn in the way that works for him, and you're going to help other students learn in a way that works for them. So it's important not to have this be a time when it looks like you're providing favoritism to Caesar, but where it looks like you're providing support for Caesar while providing support for all students. This can be more difficult and challenging than it sounds like, but it can be done. So this is how to complete a competing behavior pathways worksheet. you are able to complete the behavior intervention plan or the behavior support plan based on what you come up with in this worksheet. You typically complete this worksheet when you're doing the FBA or the functional behavior assessment. And then you're going to, in the functional behavior assessment, you're going to analyze what the function of the behavior is and what the target goal is going to be. And then you're going to flesh that out in the behavior intervention plan or the behavior support plan. We'll get into more of those details later. For now, I would like you to look at Moodle and download the next case study and practice completing a competing behavior pathways worksheet.